Today we will explore the forgotten secrets of medieval construction, techniques developed by peasants that have defied time and remain standing after 8 centuries. Before continuing with the video, remember to subscribe to the channel for more documentary narratives like this one. In 21st century rural England, more than 5,000 medieval structures remain standing, silent witnesses to an era that most consider primitive. Cottages, barns, and community halls built 800 years ago endure where modern buildings have already yielded to the elements, humidity, and natural wear. Contemporary engineers, armed with precision instruments and advanced technical knowledge, study these structures with growing curiosity, seeking to understand how workers without access to nails, concrete, or power tools manage to erect constructions of such durability. The answer to this question leads us on a fascinating journey through ancestral European knowledge. To understand the ingenuity of medieval builders, one must first understand the material limitations they faced daily. Iron, at that time, represented a resource of extraordinary value. A handful of iron nails was equivalent to an entire day of hard labor in the fields, an unthinkable sum for families who could barely secure basic sustenance. Blacksmiths worked laboriously through full shifts to produce approximately 100 nails, while modern machines manufacture more than 700 per minute. This scarcity transformed each nail into an object of family heritage, passed down from generation to generation as precious patrimony. When old structures were demolished, workers would sift through the rubble in search of every metallic fragment, recovering and reusing materials that their families had accumulated over decades. The Romans had mastered the art of concrete, building aqueducts and monumental structures that defied the imagination. However, with the fall of the Roman Empire, these recipes were lost, leaving medieval builders without reliable binding agents, without affordable metallic fasteners, with only wood, earth, and the resources that nature offered. It was precisely this apparent limitation that forced the development of revolutionary techniques, methods that, paradoxically, would surpass many modern constructions in durability. The first secret of this ancestral wisdom lay in the selection of wood, a process that was anything but casual. Medieval master builders developed an intimate relationship with the forests around them, spending years learning to identify the ideal trees for each specific purpose. An oak was not simply an oak to these experienced artisans. The analysis began with the bark, where tight, vertical grooves indicated dense wood resistant to rot. The angle of the branches revealed the tree's growth history, providing crucial information about the quality of the interior wood. Branches that projected directly upward indicated rapid growth, the result of competition with neighboring trees for sunlight. This wood would be weak and fibrous, unsuitable for construction. On the other hand, branches that spread horizontally signaled slow and controlled growth, producing compact grains capable of resisting for centuries without rotting. The choice of the moment of cutting demonstrated equal sophistication. Trees felled during the winter possessed minimal sap circulation, resulting in wood that was naturally drier from the start. This natural drying meant that insects found little food and fungi could not establish themselves, eliminating the need for chemical treatments that simply did not exist at that time. Medieval builders instinctively understood biological cycles that modern science would only explain centuries later. The true treasure hunt, however, involved finding what they called crux, naturally curved timbers that matched the arches necessary for roof structures. Builders specifically looked for oaks that grew on hillsides. The natural slope of the terrain forced these trees to develop denser and stronger fibers on one side, as if the trunk itself were practicing weightlifting against gravity throughout its entire life. This compression wood became the most resistant part of the entire structure. When a suitable oak was finally identified, the preparation process followed precise protocols transmitted orally through generations. The tree was felled and sawn in half longitudinally, creating 2 symmetrical pieces that would form a perfect Gothic arch when leaned against each other. Nature had done the engineering work. The builders only needed to find where she had left her gifts. A single peasant hut required approximately 30 mature oaks, not just any oaks, but specific specimens with specific curvatures and specific grain patterns. Entire forests were managed for generations, specifically to produce construction timber. The technique of using green wood represents perhaps the most counterintuitive aspect of all medieval construction. Modern thinking insists on drying wood for months, sometimes years before use, fearing warping, cracking, and shrinkage. Medieval builders did exactly the opposite, working with freshly cut wood saturated with moisture. This apparently reckless approach hid a brilliant logic. Green oak is soft, surprisingly malleable. A joint that would take hours to carve in dry wood could be formed in minutes using basic tools. The work progressed. Quickly, precious iron tools suffered less wear, and the efficiency of the process allowed projects to be completed before the seasons changed. The true secret, however, revealed itself in the months following construction. As the green wood lost approximately 15% of its weight in moisture, the fibers progressively contracted. Joints cut into this fresh wood tightened like constrictors, embracing their prey. The more the wood dried, the firmer the connections became, a process that continued for years after the initial construction. Contemporary engineers have tested these connections and discovered that a properly dried green wood joint becomes practically impossible to separate without destroying the wood itself. Meanwhile, nailed joints in Victorian buildings are already falling apart after only 150 years. The crux formed the backbone of the entire medieval structure. These paired curved timbers were not invented by any individual genius. They were discovered by observant builders who realized that nature had already solved the structural engineering problem. When two of these curved pieces were leaned against each other and joined at the apex, they formed a Gothic arch that transferred all the weight of the roof directly to the ground. There was no lateral force pushing the walls outward, no need for massive foundations. The arch took care of everything. The load-bearing capacity of these structures defies expectations. A properly assembled set of crux supported up to 20 tons of thatch using nothing but gravity and friction. 20 tons is approximately equivalent to the weight of 4 adult elephants standing on the roof. No nails, no screws, just wood touching wood in precisely calculated connections. The curved shape offered additional advantages that went beyond mere structural capacity. Flat walls catch the wind like sails, receiving the full force of storms directly. An arch, on the other hand, allows the wind to slide over its surface, deflecting forces downward instead of allowing lateral impacts. Box-shaped constructions were flattened by storms. Houses with a crux frame simply ignored them. Archaeological records confirm this extraordinary durability. Original crux structures remain standing in England after 800 years of uninterrupted storms. The oldest specimens, dated by dendrochronological analysis, go back to the mid-13th century, and many experts believe the technique may be even older, possibly evolving from Anglo-Saxon practices. The term crux derives from the Middle English croc, originating from the Old Norse kraka, meaning hook, the same root that gave rise to the word crooked, meaning curved. The connection between these massive timbers without any metallic fastener required joints of exceptional precision. The mortise and tenon joint seems deceptively simple in its basic conception, just a rectangular piece fitting into a corresponding rectangular hole. No glue, no nails, nothing but wood against wood. The difference between medieval carpenters and amateur builders lay in the obsessive precision with which these joints were cut. The tenons were deliberately sized slightly larger than the holes that would receive them, perhaps 1.5 millimeters above the exact size. This apparently insignificant difference created constant pressure between the surfaces, year after year, decade after decade. When storms lashed the walls, these joints reacted in a counterintuitive way. Instead of loosening, they tightened even further. The force of the wind pulled the tenon deeper into the hole, creating progressively stronger connections. Medieval carpenters developed more than 20 variations of this single basic joint. Some resisted twisting, others supported vertical loads, some specialized in preventing horizontal separation. Each variation was designed for exactly where it would be installed in the construction, a library of solutions accumulated over centuries of practical experimentation. Archaeologists made a revealing discovery. During excavations of medieval structures, some joints were intentionally left slightly loose. not out of carelessness, but by calculated strategy. These buildings needed to sway during storms instead of resisting rigidly and breaking. Flexibility was the goal. The builders instinctively understood principles that modern engineers studying seismic resistance would only formalize centuries later. Oak pegs, called tree nails, did something that iron never could. When moisture penetrated a joint, these wooden pegs expanded, creating a self-tuning seal that became stronger with the rain. An iron nail under the same conditions would rust, weaken, shrink, and progressively loosen. The builders carved square pins and hammered them into round holes. The square corners bit into the fibers of the surrounding wood, like small teeth, preventing any rotation or movement. The technique known as wattle and daub dates back at least 6,000 years. The process began with the wattle, a lattice woven from flexible hazel or willow branches interlaced between vertical stakes, creating a structure similar to a giant basket that provided stability. The daub was a mixture of clay, sand, straw, animal hair, and fresh dung. The dung contained natural oils and fibers that made the mixture waterproof for decades without the need for maintenance. The finished wall dried harder than modern drywall. The thermal performance of these walls was equivalent to approximately 15 centimeters of modern fiberglass insulation. The cottages remained cool during summer heat waves and warm when January winds howled outside. When storms battered them, the wattle and daub flexed slightly, absorbed the energy, and returned to their original position. Stone walls cracked under the same conditions. Rigid materials break. Flexible materials survive. The cost of this entire system was literally zero in monetary terms. Families gathered everything from surrounding lands, clay from riverbanks, branches from cultivated hedges, dung from their own cattle. Thatch roofing seems at first glance too primitive to deserve serious consideration, just straw piled on a roof. The reality, however, completely contradicts this impression. A properly constructed thatch roof lasted 40 to 60 years. The secret lay partially in its weight, or rather its lack thereof. Thatch weighs approximately 3 kilograms per square meter. Clay tiles weigh almost double. This meant that every beam, every joint, every structure below carried half the tension. Each stalk of straw has a natural waxy coating, and when water hits them, it runs down like rain sliding off a duck's back. Thousands of these stalks, arranged in layers at sharp angles, create a cascade effect where water never stays still long enough to penetrate. The specific angle of the roof, between 50 and 55 degrees, was determined through centuries of experimentation. Gale-force wind gusts actually pressed the thatch more firmly against the structure. Modern tiles catch air from below and peel off. Thatch just hunker down lower. The foundations presented another apparent paradox. No concrete, no rebar. Structures that should have sunk into the ground remain firm on land that would crack a modern slab in 5 years. The solution involved working with the earth instead of fighting against it. Corner posts sat on large flat stones that functioned like snowshoes. Instead of a narrow post piercing the soft soil, the stones spread the weight over a much larger area. Modern foundations try to remain perfectly rigid, a losing battle against the natural movement of the earth. Frost heave occurs when frozen soil swells upward in winter and sinks back in the spring. Medieval structures simply followed the movement. The entire construction rose slightly in January and settled again in April. Those flexible joints absorbed this seasonal dance without breaking. Hipped. Roofs reduced wind lift by 40% compared to gable roofs with flat gable walls. Heavy eaves that extended beyond the walls forced the wind to curve downward instead of penetrating underneath and lifting. Diagonal timbers called braces transferred lateral forces directly to the ground. Roof trusses were assembled completely on the ground first, every joint tested, every peg fixed. Only then did the community raise them into position. Buildings were deliberately positioned with their narrow ends facing the prevailing winds. No aspect of medieval construction can be understood in isolation from the community context. Raising a single cruck structure required at least 20 adults working in perfect coordination. One person called out commands, others pulled ropes. Everyone pushed at exactly the right moment. House building was not an individual project. It was a community event. Villages developed systems of specialization over generations. Everyone knew their role even before showing up. This cooperative system created networks of obligation. You help raise my walls this month. I help rethatch your roof next spring. The entire village became interconnected through construction debts that functioned as medieval insurance. Your cottage catches fire. No one files a claim. They simply show up because they owe you, and because someday they will need the same help. Knowledge passed through this system as well. No blueprints, no written manuals, just experienced hands guiding younger ones. Houses built in the 1970s already show significant structural problems, while medieval structures have survived 8 centuries of storms and wars. The joints accommodate centuries of soil settlement without cracking. The earth moves, the building moves with it. The wattle and daub walls breathe. Moisture enters and leaves freely. Hermetically sealed modern buildings express surprise when mold takes over. The heart of the oak contains natural tannins that poison any fungus or insect trying to devour it. No treatments necessary, no chemicals applied. When something eventually wore out, builders could swap individual pieces without touching the rest. Restoration workers remove a single timber, fit a new one, and leave. The building barely notices. Modern earthquake engineers now study these medieval structures to understand principles of flexibility. Peasants who could not afford nails accidentally invented earthquake-resistant design. The most enduring legacy of these builders is perhaps not any specific technique, but the demonstration that limitations can generate innovation. Without access to nails, they developed superior joints. Without concrete, they created foundations that accommodate movement instead of resisting it. Without industrialized materials, they learned to use what nature offered in ways that respected the natural properties of the materials. 800 years they remain standing, not as preserved ruins, but as functional structures that continue to shelter people and activities. Each of these constructions represents a silent testimony to human ingenuity, to the capacity to create elegant solutions with limited resources, to the wisdom that emerges when communities collaborate over generations in search of common goals. The next time you pass by one of these ancient structures, perhaps on a trip through the English countryside, consider the history embedded in every curved timber, every precise joint, every carefully constructed wattle wall. Encoded there is knowledge that took centuries to develop and that we almost lost in our rush toward the new. There is the proof that sometimes the apparently wrong way, the way without modern resources, without industrialized materials, without sophisticated tools, is actually the right way. Master thatchers maintain traditions that date back millennia, adapting ancient methods for modern contexts while preserving the essence of practices developed by generations of anonymous artisans. Contemporary architects and engineers interested in sustainable construction visit these structures not out of historical curiosity, but in search of practical solutions to current problems related to durability, energy efficiency, and reduced environmental impact. If this documentary has sparked your curiosity about the ancestral knowledge that shaped our world, consider subscribing to this channel to follow more investigations like this one. Each episode dives into forgotten stories, lost techniques, and wisdom preserved through the centuries. Leave a comment sharing what surprised you most about medieval builders, or if you know of ancient structures in your own region that deserve to be explored. Like this video if it changed your perspective on what it truly means to build to last. Together, we can ensure that this knowledge is not lost again but is passed on to the generations to come, just as those medieval master carpenters passed their techniques through the centuries.